In the hushed air of Westminster Abbey, every detail of tradition seemed perfectly in place. The ancient stone arches carried centuries of ritual, the stained glass windows scattered color across velvet seats, and the silence was punctuated only by the solemn shuffle of attendants. On that Commonwealth Day, the Abbey was not just a house of prayer, it was the stage where the monarchy reminded the world of its order. At the center of that carefully orchestrated tableau stood Princess Anne, the embodiment of duty and iron resolve. She had built her life on discipline, unshaken by scandal, unbent by shifting public sentiment, a living relic of Elizabeth II's legacy. Every nod of her head, every measured step, radiated the authority of a woman who had never once compromised her sense of place. Into that stillness came Camilla, now queen, her entrance accompanied by whispers and curtsies, the crowd's choreography a visible sign of the crown's respect. She smiled that well-rehearsed smile, one that had shielded her for decades, a mask against criticism and old scandals. Kate, the Princess of Wales, curtsied with flawless grace, William bowed, and even their children followed the script. For a moment, the monarchy looked unbreakable, its pageantry seamless. Then, in an instant, the illusion cracked. Anne did not bend. She stopped before Camilla, upright and unwavering, her blue eyes fixed like blades. No curtsy, no acknowledgement, only the sharp presence of defiance. The Abbey seemed to hold its breath. For Camilla, the sting was unbearable. A single, withheld gesture that stripped her of recognition before the entire world. But it wasn't Anne alone who transformed that day. Standing just behind Camilla was her daughter, Laura Lopes, often forgotten by the press, rarely seen at royal events. On this day, she became unforgettable. Her eyes burned with a fury rarely caught by cameras. When she glared at Princess Anne, the Abbey turned from a cathedral into an arena. That death stare carried more than momentary anger. It carried years of resentment. Laura had grown up in the shadows, her mother vilified in headlines, her own name absent from the royal directory of importance. She was not a princess, not a duchess, not anything other than Camilla's daughter. The Abbey became her battlefield, and that glare was her weapon. The cameras caught it, magnified it, and by evening it was everywhere. Tabloid covers, primetime news, endless social media reels. Camilla's daughter strikes back, Laura Lopes challenges royal blood. What had been a silent glance now exploded into a public showdown. Behind palace walls, the silence was heavier than the headlines. No one dared speak openly about Anne's refusal or Laura's audacity, but tension thickened like smoke in every corridor. For Camilla, the humiliation was unbearable. She had clawed her way from scandal to crown, endured decades of whispers and ridicule, only to find that in Anne's eyes, she was still not worthy. And worse, Anne's defiance had denied her daughter too. In Camilla's mind, Laura was not just her child, she was proof. Proof that Camilla had earned her place, that her bloodline could merge into the House of Windsor. Now, Anne's unbending stance made Laura a symbol of rejection. Inside Clarence House, the arguments turned bitter. Charles tried to calm her, insisting Anne's rigidity was nothing new, that it was rooted in loyalty to Elizabeth, but Camilla would not be soothed. To her, Anne's refusal was no longer just about respect, it was a declaration of war. She replayed that moment over and over, her daughter's wounded pride a constant echo. Laura, too, carried it with her, replaying Zara's clipped words at gatherings, Eugenie's polite distance, the whispers that she was nothing more than a guest in a family bound by blood. Every interaction confirmed what the glare at Westminster had revealed: she was locked out no matter how high her mother had climbed. And so, quietly, but with the resolve of someone who had fought this battle before, Camilla began to plot. If tradition would not accept Laura, then strategy would force them to. The press would carry her daughter's name, charity stages would spotlight her, royal tours would place her front and center. This was no longer just about a stare in the Abbey. This was about legitimacy itself. For Camilla, the battle lines were drawn, not for a crown, but for the right of her daughter to stand as more than a shadow. In the gilded drawing room of Clarence House, Camilla stood before a tall mirror, her reflection framed by velvet curtains and heavy chandeliers. The woman staring back was draped in purple silk, crowned and bejeweled, yet still unsettled. She touched the pearl necklace at her throat, the gift Charles had given her on their wedding day, and whispered to herself that she would not allow her daughter to remain invisible. Laura would not suffer the fate of being forever dismissed as an outsider. For Camilla, this was no longer a question of vanity. It was the culmination of years of being told she did not belong. Her daughter would not carry that same burden. Laura, meanwhile, sat alone in her chamber, the glow of her tablet illuminating headlines that mocked her every move. The photographs from Westminster stared back at her own face frozen mid-glare, her expression dissected by pundits and trolls alike. Some labeled her defiance bold, others pitiful. She scrolled through the commentary until her eyes blurred, each word carving deeper into her pride. In her heart, she longed to belong, to be seen as more than just Camilla's child. Yet the royal world with its invisible walls reminded her constantly that she was a guest in a house where birthright mattered more than merit. Camilla's response was swift. She summoned her most loyal advisors into a private meeting, her voice steady but burning with determination. The strategy was clear. Laura would be placed front and center in every public engagement possible. No longer would she linger at the edges of photographs or be politely omitted from speeches. Camilla demanded a narrative shift. Laura would be written into the script of the monarchy. "I want her on the front page," Camilla ordered, "not as my daughter, but as part of the new royal family." Her tone left no room for hesitation. The courtiers nodded, though unease flickered behind their eyes. They understood the danger of pushing too far against tradition, but they also knew better than to challenge the Queen's resolve. The stage was chosen carefully, a royal tour of Canada. To the public, it was framed as a celebration of cultural ties and charitable endeavors. In reality, it was Camilla's campaign to elevate Laura. The itinerary was filled with charity galas, art exhibitions, and diplomatic receptions, each moment meticulously arranged to ensure Laura's prominence. Photographers were instructed to capture her beside Camilla and Charles, never in the background. Her speeches were rehearsed until every word dripped with poise. The grand finale was said to be a gala in Montreal, where Laura was slated to receive an award tied to Queen Elizabeth II's legacy. For Camilla, this was the perfect symbol, a public endorsement of Laura as part of the monarchy's future. From the beginning, though, the cracks showed. At a glittering reception in Ottawa, Laura arrived in a sapphire gown, her smile carefully practiced. Across the hall, Zara Phillips and Princess Eugenie stood at the center of conversation, their laughter bright, their confidence effortless. Laura approached cautiously, offering compliments about Zara's diplomatic work in Paris. The reply was cold. Zara's lips curled into a polite but cutting line as she remarked, "Haven't you had enough attention since Westminster?" The words landed like a dagger. Laura's smile faltered, her hand shook around her clutch, and the photographers caught the moment she was left standing alone. By morning, newspapers ran the images. Camilla's daughter frozen out abroad. The humiliation deepened as the tour progressed. Eugenie's civility was fleeting, Zara's distance unmistakable, and Canadian dignitaries seemed hesitant to treat Laura as an equal. At each event, Camilla's carefully laid plans were undercut by subtle gestures, clipped words, or pointed silences. The photographs told a story she could not control. Laura standing at the fringes, her place uncertain, her presence tolerated rather than embraced. Back in their private suite at the Fairmont Chateau, Laurier, Camilla seethed. She crushed a handkerchief in her fist, pacing furiously while Laura sat slumped in a chair, her eyes red from unshed tears. "They didn't have to do this to you," Camilla hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Zara humiliated you deliberately, but I will not let them destroy you." Laura, breaking under the weight of exhaustion, whispered that she was tired of trying to fit into a portrait where she would never be welcome. Yet her mother's grip tightened on her hand, her eyes ablaze with defiance. "The gala in Montreal will change everything," Camilla declared. "They cannot deny you there." Every detail of the Montreal gala became an obsession. The speech, the lighting, the placement of cameras. Nothing was left to chance. Camilla's ambition now burned brighter than ever, fueled not just by a queen's pride, but by a mother's determination. For Laura, the prospect of recognition was both terrifying and irresistible. She longed for validation, but deep down, she sensed that the crown spotlight was a fire that could just as easily consume as illuminate. The chandeliers in Montreal's Grand Hall glittered like frozen stars, casting their light over rows of dignitaries dressed in silk and tailored suits. The gala was the climax of the Canadian tour, the stage where Camilla had invested every ounce of her will to see her daughter recognized. Laura, draped in an ivory gown that shimmered under the spotlights, waited backstage with trembling hands clasped together. She repeated her speech silently, each word rehearsed until it felt carved into her bones. This was supposed to be her night, the moment she stepped out of the shadows and into history. In the front row, Camilla sat with perfect posture, her eyes fixed on the stage as though she could will destiny into compliance. Charles leaned back in his chair, visibly uneasy, his hand pressed against his temple. Across the room, cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and the atmosphere thickened with expectation. When the host stepped to the lectern and announced the presentation of the award tied to Queen Elizabeth II's legacy, silence rippled through the hall. Laura closed her eyes, drew in a breath, and prepared to walk forward. Then the words that followed cut the air like a blade. The Honors Council regrets to announce that the Royal Legacy Award will not be presented this year. The declaration was brief, but its impact thundered through the room. Guests murmured in confusion, heads turned, and the orchestra faltered mid-note. Laura froze in place, her breath caught in her throat, her entire body rigid. Her carefully rehearsed lines disintegrated, leaving her with nothing but a crushing weight in her chest. Out in the audience, Camilla's face hardened to ice, her hands gripping each other so tightly that her knuckles blanched. The humiliation was total. What was meant to be Laura's ascension had been snatched away in an instant. At the edge of the hall, William sat quietly, his expression unreadable, Princess Anne beside him with her usual unflinching calm. They exchanged only the faintest nod, a silent confirmation that their message had been delivered. No public confrontation, no open clash, just a decisive reminder that bloodlines cannot be rewritten by ambition. The monarchy's walls had held firm. Laura's moment had been extinguished before it could ignite. When the gala ended, Laura slipped away from the stage, her steps heavy, her face drained of all expression. She did not look for her mother, nor for anyone else. Camilla followed later, her back straight, her face set in an expression of frozen dignity, as though daring anyone to interpret her silence as defeat. The photographers caught them leaving together, mother and daughter side by side, yet cloaked in isolation. By morning, headlines across the globe carried the images. Dream crushed in Montreal, Camilla's daughter rejected, Monarchy holds its line. Inside their hotel suite that night, silence hung like a veil. Laura sat before a mirror, her eyes swollen, the gown she wore now feeling like a costume, mocking her failure. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "Mother, I never wanted to be a princess." The words were simple but heavy, an admission that the fight had hollowed her out. Camilla sat nearby, stripped of her public armor, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her robe falling loosely about her frame. For the first time in years, she seemed small, powerless. She had fought scandals, endured decades of ridicule, and climbed to the throne, but none of it had been enough to shield her daughter from rejection. Tears threatened, but she forced them back, her silence speaking more than words could. Far away in London, within the oak-paneled walls of Buckingham Palace, William met with Princess Anne in a quiet chamber. Firelight flickered across their faces as they spoke in hushed tones. Anne, steady as always, sipped her tea and reminded him that the decision had not been about cruelty. "We guard what was built with blood," she said softly, her conviction carved from a lifetime of loyalty. William nodded, his gaze steady. For him, the choice had been painful but necessary. It was the right decision, not for us, for the monarchy. The words carried the weight of his role as heir, the acceptance that his duty would always demand sacrifice. Across television screens worldwide, footage replayed of Camilla and Laura leaving Canada in silence. No speeches, no explanations, only fleeting images of two women stepping into a car as cameras flashed. To the world, they were shadows retreating into the night. To the monarchy, they were proof that legitimacy cannot be manufactured. Within the House of Windsor, blood remained the ultimate authority. Camilla's ambition had faltered, Laura's yearning had broken, and the unyielding walls of tradition stood taller than ever.